And the number of people coming into our cities and into our country, I just don't think it's realistic that this can continue with so many people having their own private backyards.
If the taxes are a lot lower, building lower density buildings rather than higher density, well, that's what's going to get built.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And today we're going to talk about the intersection of the YIMBY movement and urbanism and ask the question, is the end goal here to legalize density and walkable neighborhoods, or is it to require them? And if so, does that mean that the backyard becomes a thing of the past?
But before we have that conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
When we talk about walkable neighborhoods, there are two main reasons why we advocate for them. One is that I just don't see how we can have everyone get their own car when, I feel like the roads are pretty full as they are in a lot of our cities. I don't think that the number of people coming into this country could each have their own private vehicle and still have enough space in the roads for everyone to get where they need to go. But also, I think it's something that a lot of people really like, and they would choose to live in walkable neighborhoods if they had that choice. Even people who live in suburban neighborhoods and don't mind relying on their car for their everyday tasks, they often go on vacation to places like New York City or Europe, and they come back and I hear things like, it was amazing, we walked everywhere. It's a really freeing thing to be able to do that. But of course, you can have walkable neighborhoods that aren't actually dense neighborhoods, but we talk about having dense walkable neighborhoods. Like your area in the Glebe in Ottawa is a perfect example of that. It's very walkable, not so dense. And so is mine actually along the Danforth in Toronto. When you talk about legalizing density, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think you're bang on that there is a big overlap between density and walkability, but they're not the same thing. You can have neighborhoods that are quite walkable, but not particularly dense. You can also have neighborhoods that are quite dense, but not particularly walkable. So, when we talk about legalizing density, this sounds strange to normal people. They go, "Well, what do you mean, like legalize density? Like apartment buildings are legal?" But we're really talking about four things that make it difficult to build dense neighborhoods that are also livable. The first obvious one is just zoning, right? If you require every building in the neighborhood to be a single detached home, you don't allow any retail, that kind of thing, you're not going to have a very dense neighborhood. The second is building code, and we had a recent episode about staircase reform. It can prevent or make certain building types, certain missing middle building types, uneconomical to build or just lower quality than they should be. The third is taxation and development charges. If it's a lot cheaper, if the taxes are a lot lower, building lower density buildings rather than higher density, well, that's what's going to get built. So the tax system is important. And then finally, municipal processes, right? If it's really easy to build a neighborhood of single detached homes, again, without much retail and without much walkability, if the red tape is easier, if those kind of go through a planning process easier, then those are more likely to get built than buildings that are more controversial, that might require more municipal hearings, neighborhood type, discussions and that kind of thing, and just might sit on a planner's desk for years at a time. So those are what we're talking about, and we should be clear that that's not suggesting that anything goes, right? We're not replacing a planning system with anarchy. Just this idea that the system has become a little bit too prohibitive, that we've made it just a little bit too difficult to build dense neighborhoods. So I'm going to throw it back to you. Now, let's suppose we did all of those things, those four kind of things that I mentioned. What do you think our cities would look like?
I think you'd get more of those missing middle homes. I think that there's a lot of demand for them at the right prices. I know that a lot of people want to have their own single family home, and if it's the same price, then sure, I'm sure everyone would pick that. But the reality is it shouldn't be the same price, and if things were appropriately taxed, I think that you would end up with a lot more like low rises and missing middle homes, maybe with some shared backyards. I think about places like I've seen pictures of places in Spain, for example, where you have these like kind of low rise places that have, they're almost like a square, and in the middle, in the back,
Yeah.
across from, like blocked out from the street, you have places where kids can play and there's no cars that can hit them. Or I see in Montreal when I visited people there, it's like you can find these lots of homes that are like duplexes, triplexes, and people can share the backyard. And that works because I can tell you, like looking around, I have a backyard. Most people aren't using their backyard most of the time. When we talk about kind of like appropriately taxing, I just wanted to bring up, and I'll pull up a tweet for those watching on video. It's a tweet from S Jamie It, or S Jamie It. I don't know what it's supposed to be pronounced, but what it says is, this single apartment building on just 1.6 acres of land in Centertown in Ottawa brings in more property tax revenue than this entire 36.3 acre subdivision in Barrhaven, which is kind of like a suburb within Ottawa. It's more than 50 times the property tax revenue per acre. And so then he has a picture of each of them. So you could kind of see how different that this little apartment building complex brings in $1.3 million compared to $1 million for something so much bigger. And so that's where I feel like it's not being appropriately taxed, where I think if people had to actually pay for like the cost of servicing those neighborhoods and it was done in that kind of way, I think a lot of people would not make the choice to live in those kinds of single family subdivisions. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That the way we do property taxes and development charges and a lot of various fees basically make it that dense downtown neighborhoods or just denser neighborhoods end up subsidizing the lower cost ones. And I think there's not universal, but there's, I think, large scale agreements among YIMBYs and urbanists, and even a lot of municipal planners that's probably not a good way of doing things. That
Mm.
probably encourages sprawl. So we'd certainly want to get rid of that. And so if we did these four things that I'd mentioned, I think we would see a lot more. A lot more high rises, but particularly a lot more mid rises, right? The sort of 4 to 6 story type buildings, and that would be on land that currently has a lot of single detached homes. Not just downtown, but in some of our suburbs as well. We'd probably see a loss of single detached, but also semi detached, row houses, that kind of thing. We'd build up instead of building out, but that would require essentially the demolition of a lot of ground oriented housing. So we just have fewer ground oriented houses and fewer private backyards, as you called them. So this basically then creates an option for us. The first is we could say, well, we know people like having, or at least some people like having a private backyard. So what we can do instead is open up additional land for development and allow people to put on whatever they want on that land and make sure that they're actually paying the full cost of those services. But if we did that, I'm sure a lot of people would choose to have a single detached, a semi-detached, or a row home. If we're opening enough land. So that's kind of option one. Option two is basically to not do that. Say, you know what? We're not going to extend any urban growth boundaries. We're not going to extend any municipal boundaries. We're just going to keep whatever land we have available for development is there for development. Chances are you're not going to get any single detached homes that way, or semi-detached, that again you get more mid-rise. And we have groups in Canada, in Ontario, that are advocating for that basically the single detached home or even the duplex should be a thing of the past, or at least something that only really really rich people have. So really there's two different paths we can go down here. It's, we could allow for building out, or we can say, you know what, no, all building just has to be up, and backyards are either extinct or only for rich people. I'd absolutely love to get your take on this, because I think this is going to divide a lot of our listeners and our viewers on which option we should go down.
I think it makes a lot of sense that in the future, private backyards could be much more expensive. I don't have that much of a problem with it because, like, it's especially if you look within cities, like it's land is at a premium. And I think that the way our taxes are done is it's kind of subsidizing them so that people aren't actually paying the true cost. And if they had to pay the true cost, I think a lot of people would make different choices. For example, like if someone could move outside of the city 2 hours and go get a single detached home with a big backyard, a lot of people would love to do that. But if they actually had to pay for like what it actually costs to service that, to do garbage pickup compared to doing it in a city or in a condo in particular or a multiplex, like it would be very expensive. Would they be able to make that choice? I don't know. And a lot of people, I think they would have to do the math on whether it makes sense to move out of the city or stay in a more dense area where they don't have to have these higher expenses. And of course, I always think about the expense of having a car is like, it's really expensive. Um, and if you move outside the city, you're kind of telling yourself you absolutely need a car, probably one for each adult in that household, typically. Um, so it depends. Like, I think it's like nice to have private backyards for sure, but at the same time, when I think about the cost to the environment of the number of people moving outside, it's still commuting into cities, and the number of people coming into our cities and into our country, I just don't think it's realistic that this can continue with so many people having their own private backyards. And I know it's like right now a lot of people can get them, but it's still this kind of weird thing where it's like you either have your own private space or you're in a high rise with like almost nothing. And we don't really have that in the middle, and I think that if we could kind of open those ones up in the middle where people have like a semi-private space, or like at least have like lots of parks nearby, which we don't have enough of them in a lot of our places where we densify. Like it's nowhere near enough, and it's not does not replace a backyard because of the lack of space. I think that people would just make different choices if there were different options available to them.
Right, but it's still, in some sense that doesn't really answer the question, right? That, at some level, and I think we're all in agreement that we shouldn't be subsidizing sprawl, right? So we should end that. But,
Sure.
the difference is, and I compare it to cigarettes, right? Should we, there's a difference between taxing cigarettes more and banning cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think that, and I think that's what's going to sort of divide parts of the YIMBY movement of, should we be making, should we be taxing kind of that suburban development more in terms of property tax or whatever, and let people make the choices that they want to make? Or should we just say, no, you can't do it. You can't do it for environmental reasons or so on. My view, and I'm kind of picking on you, so I feel like I should give my view now. My view is that I don't think the solution, that we just can't build these things, or that we effectively have to ban them. I don't think that's politically viable. I can get why, I understand the environmental concerns. I understand why uh, advocates, say, okay, we should only build up, can't allow building out. I just don't see that as being socially viable. Now, does that mean anything goes? Absolutely not. We should not be, we should be setting aside valuable land. So we can say, okay, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be building out on class one farmland. Obviously, any place that's prone to flooding, don't build out there. But there are a lot of places in Ontario where it doesn't have necessarily great land quality. I do think we have to consider building on these things. Now,
Mm.
that's certainly not suggesting that we make them all, we zone them all single detached. I think we should, zone for density. But if people want to build single detached homes or townhouses or whatever, I think we should let them. And I think, I think we're going to run into trouble if we say, no, sorry, even if you've got the money, we're not going to allow you to do this.
So you're saying get rid of the greenbelt?
Oh yeah, that's totally what I am not saying get rid of the green belt at all. I actually think the green belt is a useful model of what we should be doing, of setting aside valuable land. Now, I definitely think there's work to be done to make sure that the boundaries make sense of the green belt, and again, that the boundaries make sense of urban growth boundaries. Right? I don't think it can be a no conversation.
I don't think though that it is. I think if you ban it or if you just like make people pay their own way instead of subsidizing it, like just reset it back to like make it that it's cheaper to build more densely, then I think it'll happen on its own. Like I think you'll still end up in a situation where it'll be very expensive to have a single family home with a backyard, as it kind of should be.
So you're okay with then extending urban growth boundaries?
It's I think if you have certain places where it makes sense, especially like I know there are places in the Greenbelt where like there's GO trains and you're like, you can't build beside this GO train. And I'm like, no, build
Yeah,
beside the GO train. Like, come on, let people
yeah.
live in places where they can actually just like hop on the train. But it doesn't make sense to ban it entirely. Like you have to see where it makes sense. But again, like if they have to pay for the cost of servicing it, I think you'll still see a lot of decrease in the use of private backyards and except from very wealthy people.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And again, I think there's understanding that we shouldn't be subsidizing some types of development over others. Particularly, we shouldn't be subsidizing more environmentally harmful forms of development over others. So I don't think there's any disagreement there. I think where we get into this disagreements, just online again, is the sort of uh, only build up folks versus no, we have to be reasonable about this. And one of my big concerns is that if we're very restrictive of building out, that people can't have their backyards, and at the same time, we still have robust immigration. I really worry about that backlash. I really worry that people are going to draw the wrong conclusions from that and go, okay, it's those people over there that have forced me to have a lower quality of life than the one I wanted. So I think we need to be careful here. Yes, absolutely. We need to consider the environments. We shouldn't be building on great farmland, shouldn't be building on floodplains. But I think we need to have some pragmatism here, or I do fear that this whole project just falls apart.
Do you think that having a backyard is like a good thing? Is that something that people should strive for?
Well, I think we should have people should be able to have whatever they want, so long as they're not imposing costs on others and they're not being unfairly subsidized. I would, as somebody who has a tiny postage stamps of backyard, but yes, I have one. I don't know. I feel like it'd be hypocritical of me to say, no, you can't have this. And I actually think I'm glad you asked this question, because I actually think this points to a lot of the problem in discussions where particularly older YIMBYs and older urbanists are basically telling younger people you can't have a backyard while they have one.
Mhm.
I think that gets problematic. And again, I think that that risks the whole sort of YIMBY project if it seems like we're kicking at the ladder from under people. We're going, okay, we got ours, but you can't have yours.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that the Yimbys who kind of live that value of like living in a condo, I know that there's an architect, Amma Blonder, a lot of people in the housing advocacy sphere know her. And she wrote an article talking about how she's raising her kid intentionally in a condo. And she's like, I think the headline was something like, "My parks are better than your backyards," which I'm sure she didn't write the headline. And I know that headline upset people in some ways. But at the same time, like that was kind of the feeling from the article. And I think that like it brings a good point. Like if you can have a park nearby, if you cross the street and you got this great place for your kids to run around, like maybe that's better than having a little dinky backyard that has like a little tiny slide or whatever, and you don't get to actually interact with other human beings. Like maybe it's not such a bad thing.
Well, absolutely. And I think if that's the vision, then I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not to tell people that they can't have something, but it's to offer them a better alternative,
Yeah, make
which
it better so
unfortunately right
people
now,
want it.
exactly, make it aspirational so people want it, rather than going, no, this other thing that all these other people have, you're not allowed to have it.
Thanks so much for watching and listening, and thanks as always to our producer Meredith Martin.
And if you have any burning thoughts about backyards or which option you'd prefer, please feel free to send us an email at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.